This is challenge number 4 for the Contrast and Unity unit. You are to apply all the concepts that you have learned to this point during this unit. The materials will be of your choosing, but should reflect a level of refinement to be considered a finished piece. This is not a quick sketch. This should be considered a portfolio quality piece, or at least that's your goal. For this 35-point summative grade, you will be required to submit the following source materials. These can either be photos that you've taken or sketches that you've created. Additionally, any preliminary work that you have made that can show me your work in progress, your final artwork, and there will be a couple of questions at the final part of this unit. So for your final artwork, the goal is to use all of the concepts and ideas that you've learned during this unit to this point, and the work should be ambitious. You are required to work by at least 9 by 12 inches in scale, but it can be much larger than that. You should also be using materials that you think that are going to challenge yourself. So I want you to take this opportunity to either try and explore new materials, try things out that you haven't done before, or the other way you could go is to use something that you've already used that you're very comfortable with and think about how you can develop those skills further. One other piece of criteria is that your final piece will actually be a composite of at least 2 different sources. When I say composite of 2 different sources, you're going to take 2 images and combine them in creating a singular image. This is a very useful tool that artists use all the time. We looked at an example of that in the discussion where we looked at, say, a piece by Vincent van Gogh. And you're going to submit all of these materials to the Dropbox, and they'll be labeled appropriately. So we're going to work with some limitations for this final project, is that you're going to be combining 2 different sources, and the sources should be of your own creation. So they can be a drawing from direct observation, they can be a drawing from imagination, it can be a drawing from a photo, or you can actually have a photo yourself. In the example that I give, I actually using 2 photos that I've taken, but what you're not going to do is that you're not going to use a photo from the internet or a photo that somebody else took. You're going to create an image based on 2 photos or 2 drawings, or either or. You can mix them together, but it's going to be something that you are creating the source material for. You're actually going to be then submitting that material to the Dropbox as preliminary work, and they should be labeled appropriately. For my example, I decided to use 2 photos that I've taken when I went to Yellowstone over the summer. I'm going to use the background mountains here, and then in the foreground, I'm going to use this other image of some trees and some grass areas too. And so I'm going to merge both of these together. I'm using Art Studio here, and I imported these images to this program, this application on the iPad, and I'm resizing them and sort of moving them around, and I'm changing the opacity of the front layer so I can see how the 2 layers are going to interact with each other. You can use any materials you want. I'm using the digital interface here because I think it shows up a little bit better, so you can sort of see what's going on. It's a little bit difficult to see some drawings and things like that. I have to do a lot of resizing to this image so that it all fits together. And you can see I'm sort of moving things around and trying to figure out some of these compositional ideas and having contrast in it. The focus of this drawing is going to be to utilize some of these ideas of contrast and unity in this unit, and I'm going to, as soon as I get everything sort of set up, I'm not going to actually look at these photographs anymore, because I think they actually don't have a whole lot of contrast to them. And the idea of unity is that I'm going to take 2 photographs that are not connected and try and use some of these principles to make them unified. You can see I'm speeding this up quite a bit, but I spent a lot of time trying to get these items right where I want them to be in the composition. All right, I've sped this up quite a bit, but you can see my approach here is that I'm using this idea of a contour line. I'm drawing some interior parts of this tree, but I'm essentially taking all of this information that's in front of me, and this could really be done not only from a photograph, but this approach is very useful for dissecting information when you're drawing from observation. But I'm breaking all of these complex objects down into manageable shapes, and so I'm essentially dividing this plane into little puzzle pieces, and I'm sort of separating not only the objects, but where I'm seeing big value shifts and some lights and darks. And you can see I'm sort of reducing the shadow area in one area down, and I'm just drawing this sort of outline of these trees. I'm not getting all the details. I'm just sort of breaking everything down into more manageable shapes. And once I have this all done, I'm actually not going to refer back to these photographs. Is that I'm going to see what new direction my artwork takes, utilizing contrast and unity. And I don't think I really need to go back and look at this for naturalistic color or anything like that. Actually, if you look, the trees in the foreground, the light source is coming from the left, and then in the background, the light source is coming from the other direction. It's coming from the right. So if I were to manipulate these 100% accurate, they actually wouldn't match. And so as an artist, that's one of the things that we have the ability to do that, say, you can't use just in Photoshop, is that you can't really change the light source. If I was trying to match these in Photoshop, I'd probably flip the background image there, which is something that I could do. So you can see that this is just black and white now, and I have the entire space divided up into these little shapes. And one great feature about this program is that I can create different layers and not worrying about messing anything up. So I created a tone surface in the background, and that's one way that you can create a sense of unity, is that I'm putting a little bit of that color into everything. And then those guidelines that I was drawing the contour line drawing from, those I can put on a separate layer too, so I can turn those off. And there's actually some features I use in here. I will put these foreground elements on a layer, and then I will put some of the background elements on another layer. And this allows me to have greater ability to edit and change the drawing, which I'll show you after it's completed. Unfortunately, when you are drawing on a real surface with chalk pastel or something like that, you can't change things to the degree that you can digitally. And that's why this is such a great resource, I think, really for preliminary work too. So if you're working on a final piece and you're not sure about color and some of those things, this allows you to really play around with that idea. I didn't want to make this naturalistic, and by I mean naturalistic, I didn't want the colors to completely adhere to what they were in the photographs, because I thought it's a little boring. So I decided to get with like a magenta and some of these other very non-natural colors and sort of see how this drawing takes shape. So you can see I'm not flipping back on the layers with the photographs at all. I don't know where the darks and shades are anymore. I'm just using ideas and principles, and I'm just sort of mapping in different colors, different values. And once I have this drawing pretty well complete, I'm going to turn the guides off, and then I'm going to see sort of what the drawing needs. One great feature here is you can see I erased out those trees, so that's the insinuation of the trees is sort of a reverse technique there. So now that I have this image here, I think it's not quite finished. I think it's got a great color division to it, but what I decided to do was to create another layer and start increasing the contrast more. So I'm talking about these ideas of contrast and unity, and what I'm doing here is actually doing both. Is that I'm creating more contrast in value. I'm darkening some areas of the image with this sort of blue color here, this blue paint line, and what it's also doing is it's acting as a key image, is that it's putting a little bit of that blue line over the entirety of the image, and so it's sort of merging the whole image, and it's creating this idea of unity within it, but it's creating more contrast in terms of value. So it's working sort of in both of those capacities. You can see I'm sort of creating a texture there for the tree line. I'm drawing some dark areas for the background mountains. And you can see this drawing is pretty much taken shape. The last thing that I wanted to do was to sort of play around with this idea of color. And I can select individual layers, and I think first I started playing around with that background color. Thought it sort of looked like a peach, and you can see the three aspects of color I can change. So I can change the hue, I can change the saturation, and the lightness. The lightness is just regarding value. So that's what this program, I think it should say value, but it says lightness. And I decided to go with a lighter, more neutral color in the background, not that orange color. And then I started to select some of the other areas. So I really played around with this tree. I thought it looked as blue, but I thought, what would happen if it was completely different? And so if you are using this program and you start generating your material in different layers, you can go back in and edit a lot more specifically. So you can see I'm speeding this up now. I'm not, and it took me a while to get to where I thought it was refined and interesting and all of those things. So this is the final image that I'm going to turn in, and I'm going to put this in the Dropbox along with all of my preliminary work and the answers to these questions. Oh, one more last thing I want to note is that you might be thinking, I'm not using a computer, so how can I create this sort of grid line system for my drawing? Is that you can, if you're, say, using watercolor, you can just use a pencil, and then if you feel like the watercolor is opaque enough, it'll cover it up. But it's also something that you can very lightly draw in and then go back in and erase it later if you really want to. So these are the final questions that you're going to be answering and submitting to the Dropbox. You can put them in a Word document, or you can, any way that you can get this information to me is fine. This is very similar to the other questions on the other unit, but this is a good time for you to step back and sort of evaluate your own work and also give feedback on how to improve the course.